Welcome back to Hudson Appliance for another episode of Wicked Good Food. I'm your host, Matt Williams, and today is all about striped bass. So, striped bass is one of these fish that is the sport fisherman's dream. We love it. We run up the East Coast and we go catch them off Cape Cod. That's where I caught them. That's where I actually caught these fish right here. Here's a little snippet of when I was out on the boat recently.
Alright, so here we are in Vineyard Sound, right in between Martha's Vineyard over here, and right over here we've got Falmouth, doing a little bit of striper fishing. As you can see, we're doing pretty well so far. Check out what we've got in our live well. I'm about to show you what we're going to do with these things.
Alright, so as you can see, we had a beautiful day. We caught a ton of fish. That was only kind of midday that I shot this. There were so many more fish in the live well. There was enough for each of us to have all our keepers. And we had a blast, and they all went to good use. This is the last of them right here, so I wanted to share them with you. So, striped bass, as you can see here, there's stripes on it. That's how it gets its name. It's a fantastic fish. It's a relatively firm textured, but mild flavored whitefish. So if you're new to fish, this is a great way to start out with fish. It's something that we can find in local markets here around New England, in particular in the summer. But it's expensive. It can be, $16, $18, $20 and more a pound. You go out and catch it yourself, or you get to be buddy-buddy, which is what I would suggest with someone who goes and catches it and catches too much. That's the way to get yourself some striper. And you can't beat having it nice and fresh. We're going to make 3 different dishes with it today. We are going to take some of it and wrap it in really thin potatoes and bake it like that. So it's going to end up having kind of almost like a potato chip crust in some parts of it. We're going to make the dish that was the first time I ever tried striper, and that's with a strawberry pineapple salsa. And the last thing we're going to do is a very, very simple presentation and a very simple preparation, where we're going to take a cast iron skillet, some butter, a little flour, salt, and pepper, and just cook the fish real quick. So I'm going to move this off to the side right now. And I'm going to use this tool. This is called a mandolin. This is a French mandolin. It has all different knives in it. This can cut you lots and lots of different ways, so be careful if you happen to have one of these. But I'm going to use the setting on it that will cut things really thin, almost like potato chips. I went and looked for the biggest potato I could find. This is it right here. And what you're looking for is you're going to look for big, long pieces so that we can wrap it around our fish. If you want to peel it, go ahead and peel it. But you don't really need to peel it. But I'll peel a little bit around the edges. No need to peel the whole thing, because your first couple slices, you're going to take off these first couple layers. And I know a lot of times on the show I'll deep fry stuff, and it's great working in a professional kitchen. But one of my favorite things to eat is you take nice long peels like this of a potato that's clean. I cleaned all these potatoes before. Throw it in the deep fryer, just toss it with a little bit of salt and pepper. So good. Here's your original, legit potato soup. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my hand and I'm going to put the potato right on here and I'm going to slide it across. I'm going to slide a few slices and take a look at how thick they are. And actually, that looks pretty good. That's pretty good. So I'm going to do a couple more here. And if you're using a mandolin, you want to make sure that you'll notice that every time I use it, I put my hands up. When I'm working with my students, they are not allowed to use this machine without a cut-resistant glove on, or without using the supplied guard. But now we've got these nice, big, flat, really bendable pieces of potato, which is exactly what we're looking for our fish. So we move this stuff out of the way. I'm just going to move these off to the side for right now. And grab our fish. So I wasn't sure what I was going to do with this fish when I got it. So the guy on the boat, who was fantastic, and his name escapes me, was Hairball Charters. This guy was awesome. He brought us up. He was all business. I was a little intimidated at first because he didn't want to chit-chat too much. But this guy brought us to the spots where the fish were, and he was all about catching fish. So I appreciate that. But he was filleting all the fish for us afterwards, and he was skinning them. I asked if we could leave the skin on because I wanted to show you guys. But one of the things he did was he had me do it, but I scraped all the scales off. I just took a knife or a little scraper and scraped all the scales off. Because you can totally cook this with the skin on. It's one of my favorite ways to do it, is to just cut a couple little slits in the skin and pan fry it. But I'm going to take the skin off, but I wanted to be able to show you a nice piece of fish like that. So I'm going to flip it over so that the skin side is down, and I'm going to take my knife, move this out of the way. What I like to do when I'm skinning fish, and this works for any sort of fish, is I'll make a little cut right at the end, but not quite through the fish, but enough that I can get my fingers in there. Then I'm going to take my knife and angle it back. And what my goal is, I'm trying to scrape against the skin of the fish. And eventually, what I want to do is actually hold my knife relatively still and pull the skin towards me. Let's see how well I did it. So you get a nice piece of skin, which we can get rid of, and this should look beautiful. Very nice. Now there's these dark colored spots there that we can trim out. So you can just take your knife, just kind of gently cut along and remove. I'm not going to go through the whole thing and remove all of it, but you get the general idea. You want to take off as little as possible so you have as much beautiful fish left to eat. And so we're not going to make a ton of this right now. So I'm going to get one real nice sized piece here. Square that off, square that off. So this is going to be the piece we're going to use for one of our dishes. But I have this one that I prepared earlier. This is a little bit smaller fish here, but for the potato wrap one, we're going to do something a little different. Instead of one real big piece like that, we're going to have a couple smaller pieces. So trim a little scrap off there, like that. I'm going to cut, there's kind of a natural line right in the middle. You don't have to follow that line. But I want two pieces that are very similar in size for this particular preparation. Then the rest of this, we're going to just use, actually the way my grandmother cooked fish for me, the very first time I ever had it. So, very important. We want to make sure we season our stuff well. So I've got some salt here. I'm going to make sure I season both sides of my fish. And pepper. Now one thing to think about, I made a point of putting some salt and pepper over here on my board before I started. I don't want to use my raw fish fingers in my salt and pepper if I'm planning on using that for something else. So don't cross-contaminate. Nobody else will do that. Alright, a little bit of salt and pepper. So, one of these pans over here, I have a little bit of vegetable oil. So I'm just very, very simply baking this. I'm going to move it around. Whenever you're cooking fish, generally you want to cook it skin side down, because that's going to be your most nice looking side. So I'm going to leave that there. For our potato wrap fish, this is kind of cool. I'm going to take a couple pieces of potato. 2 is probably enough. I'll do 3 though. Put our fish on there. Kind of in the middle of the potato, but towards one end of the slices, and roll it up. And my goal is to get it to roll and tuck the bottoms underneath. Come on now. So you get a nice piece like that. And I actually like to leave it like that, with the end sticking off. Because remember at the beginning I said you're going to have kind of like potato chips? This part is really crunchy and crispy. So I'm going to try to gently move this over. And if it comes unrolled a little bit, just tuck it back in. So I'm going to do another one here. And so this is actually one of the recipes out of my book. In my book, I serve it with the Tarragon cream sauce. So I said, well, why not make that tonight? So that's going to be one of the sauces we make tonight. It's a Tarragon cream sauce. So I'm going to lay it in there, let the ends overhang a little bit, and just roll it up. Making sure that when you're done, it sits on the seam. And if you screw it up like I just did, unroll it a little bit. There you go. All set. So the first step is done. I'm going to wash my hands, clean up my area here, get these in the oven, and then we'll come back and we'll get going on our sauce and our salsa. Welcome back. So I had a chance to clean up my mess, sanitize my work area. Remember, I was working with raw fish, so I'm going to make sure everything is clean. So I'm going to make a salsa now. I don't want to contaminate that. Before we get to the salsa, we're going to start on our tarragon cream sauce. Pretty simple sauce, kind of an old school sauce. It's a sauce that's thickened with a roux. And if you remember what a roux is, that's just some sort of fat and flour that we cook together. We're going to start with butter. So I have a quarter of a stick of butter. I'm going to pop it in a pan here and let it melt. Turn our heat up just a little bit. And a roux is equal parts fat and flour that's cooked. So the reason we cook it is because it's going to get rid of some of that. If you ever put some raw flour in your mouth, you can actually feel it if you rub your tongue against the roof of your mouth. It's going to help to get rid of some of that flouriness and help it to thicken nice and evenly. So I want to let that melt a little bit. We're also going to make the strawberry pineapple salsa. So I've got a few of the different ingredients here. The strawberries are still in the refrigerator, but we'll get this stuff cut up. So I'm going to go ahead and add my flour to this. My butter's not quite melted, and I didn't weigh. Generally, it's equal parts by weight. But a way that you can kind of tell if you're almost there is that it should look like wet sand. So I'm going to let this kind of slowly hang out and cook a little bit. And if we need a little more flour, I'll add a little more flour. So for our salsa, there's not going to be any tomatoes in it. We're going to use this nice fresh pineapple. We're going to use a little bit of red onion, some lime, a little bit of jalapeno. We're not going to use too much because Oliver, that's funny, that's my son's name. Arthur's not a huge jalapeno guy, and some red bell pepper. First thing we're going to do is cut our onion. So I'm going to cut off the stem end, cut through the root end. And this is a big onion, we're not going to need all of this. Go ahead and peel it. You notice I always cut before I peel it. Makes it much easier to peel. And then for this salsa, I want my red onion to be pretty fine. If you want to make a salsa with big chunks, make big chunks. If you want it to be smaller, make smaller. It's up to you. But I'm going to cut these relatively fine. And once again, this is a big onion. I'm going to stop about here and cut the rest of the onion in half. Turn, cut perpendicular to what I had just done. And that's probably enough. We're not going to make a whole batch of salsas. We only have one piece of fish. I'll save that for something else. Go ahead and put my onions in the bowl. And at this point, I'm going to salt my onions. It's a pretty generous pinch of salt. So this is going to be the salt for my salsa. Adding that little bit of salt will help to get rid of some of the real intense onion flavor and some of those sulfuric compounds that make us dry. It'll help to get rid of a little of those, but it'll retain its raw texture. I'm just going to move that out of the way. So for our jalapeno, I'm going to cut the top off, cut it in half. Now, if you're using an awful lot of jalapeno, you're not accustomed to them, please make sure you wash your hands after you use them. If you want, wear gloves while you're using them. I'm just going to cut a little strip up. A couple little strips, I guess. Because what's on my finger now from this jalapeno, if I were to rub my eye or put it on my tongue, or worst of all, go to the bathroom, you'll know that you've just cut some jalapenos. But I'm going to cut this real fine. Like I said, if you want a little more spice, go ahead and spice it up. I'm going to come back to my roux here, give it a quick stir. And I'm noticing my temperature is a little bit high, so I'm going to turn it down a bit. And what you want when you're making a roux is you need to cook your flour. You want to let it cook for 10 minutes or so. It'll actually start to smell a little bit nutty. All right, we are going to use some red pepper next. I'm going to cut off the bottom and the top of the pepper. Oops. And kind of get my knife inside there. Just unroll the pepper and cut right along it. And taking care not to cut towards my fingers and remove that whole part. So that garbage. And this is all perfectly good usable pepper. We're not going to use it right now. Make sure you take the sticker off. And then here I'm going to go ahead and dice these relatively fine. Once again, it's a strawberry pineapple salsa. So I'm not looking to make up the bulk of it, of the salsa with peppers, with onions, with other things. But I want there to be enough for contrast in texture and contrast in flavor. Alright, so I've got jalapenos, I've got red peppers. Move these out of the way. I'm going to juice a lime in there. I'll roll it a little bit. Cut it in half. I'm just going to take a teaspoon and put it in there and squeeze out whatever lime juice I can get. Then we're going to take a pineapple. Whole fresh pineapple. I'm going to cut the top off. Cut the bottom off. I'm going to stand it up and kind of follow the contour of the pineapple. And go right around it. And so you want to, it's kind of a delicate balance of removing all these little eyes that are in there and not removing too much pineapple as we remove this. So if you've got to go back and trim it up again, go back and trim it up again. This. And now what I want to do here is I want to make them similar in size, so I'm going to cut this into planks. We'll reserve the rest for later. And then these planks are just going to cut into little sticks. There's a hunk of eye there that I want to pull out. Then turn, cut perpendicular to that. And I've got this nice pineapple. We're going to take a little quick break. I'm going to actually take our onions, rinse them in a little cold water to get rid of some of that salt. It'll help to make them nice and mellow. Mix all these ingredients together. We'll add our strawberries when we come back, and we'll make our sauce when we come back. Alright, so I got a chance to clean up my mess a little more. Our roux is all finished cooking here. So what I did was I actually shut the heat off on it, just so it didn't overcook. We're making a white sauce. We want to be really careful that we don't brown our flour at all. And also, one of the things that's really important about cooking with roux is that if you have your roux hot and your milk hot, or even if it just happens to be warm and you mix them together, what will happen is it'll thicken very quickly. As soon as it comes to a simmer, it'll thicken. And at that point, if it's not totally dissolved, you'll end up with little roux balls. And like you heard me say before, nobody likes roux balls bouncing around their mouth. So, I'm going to take my cold milk, I'm going to mix it in with my hot or warm roux. And then I'm going to turn my heat back on. And give it a stir. Now I'm going to let this dissolve. Let my roux dissolve into the milk. Now I added less milk than I'm anticipating adding, because by adding, once it comes to a simmer, it'll be fully thickened, and any liquid I add to it will thin it out a little bit. Alright, now I'm going to keep an eye on that while I'm finishing up the salsa. I took all those other ingredients from the salsa, put them in the bowl. Look at these beautiful, bright, vibrant colors. I'm going to take my lime, give it a couple little squeezes, and then grab my spoon, stick it right inside the lime, just turn it back and forth. I'm not worried about any pulp getting in there. Doesn't matter to me, the pulp. It's nice. A little bit of acid. That's good. I'll move this out of the way. I have some strawberries here, nice fresh strawberries. Cut the tops off them. And then these, remember the size of the other things you have in your salsa? So I'm just going to go through it. Cut them a bit. If you want, you can do 2 or 3 at a time. You know, if you really want it to be beautiful little squares, take a little bit more time doing it. If you just want them to be all similar in size, you can just call it country style. Get them cut like this. They just kind of go through one time, one direction. before I go through the other roux, I'm going to give this a little stir, because what will happen is your roux will tend to sink to the bottom, and it can burn if you leave it there too long, but also you want to make sure it has a chance to thicken while it's all dissolved. And I can actually feel it's getting a little thick on the bottom, which is good. Then I'm just going to go back and cut perpendicular to the sides cuts. And I want to give a generous pinch of salt. Not too much, but. And I'm just going to stir this all together. Now, like I said, we're making a tarragon cream sauce here. If we want, we're going to add some tarragon to this. If you want to get a little more green color in there, certainly if you were to add more jalapeno, there'd be more green, but I had tarragon, I could throw some tarragon in there. If you had some cilantro or some parsley or some basil, all those will go really nicely in here. But a little touch of green would make that stand out. So this is starting to thicken a little bit. You can see it's going to happen pretty quickly at this point. So just keep your eye on that for a second. You see how it's just starting to bubble a little bit? I can already tell it's going to be much thicker than I want it to be. Look at how thick that is. And that's okay if it's that thick. I want to turn it down now, relatively low. I'm going to go ahead, add more milk to get it to the consistency I'm looking for. And I want it to be thick, but I don't want it to be super thick. And we're making a fish dish. It shouldn't be a real heavy dish. That looks just about right. So I'm going to let that simmer for a little bit. That'll help cook out any more starchiness that might be left in there. Now, I have my tarragon here. So tarragon is a wonderful herb. It's just got this great anisey flavor. What you do is you just hold it, go kind of against the grain, and you can pull the leaves right off of it. So I'm going to take a couple minutes, pull some of these off. I'm going to check our fish. We'll get ready to add some tarragon to our sauce, which means a little bit of salt and pepper. Probably throw a little tarragon in there, because why not? And we're going to make our last fish dish. And we'll get Arthur up here and see what he thinks about our fish. All right, so our sauce is just about done. It's simmered long enough. I'm going to add our tarragon to it, right here like this. You want to add your tarragon almost as close to serving it as you can. Give this a quick stir. I actually have the heat off at this point. And this is done. I'm going to move back here. Last dish we're going to make is inspired by my grandmother Williams. So, and it's a very, very simple dish. So when I don't even know how old I was, 8 or 9, my parents rented a house on Lake Winnipesaukee. My grandmother Williams, I think, spent the whole week. My other grandparents came up for a few days. Right on the lake, we were fishing, catching just little kippers, little sunfish. And I was so excited. I caught what I thought was the biggest fish in the world. It had to be like that big. Maybe it was a little bigger. But I brought it to my grandmother and she said she would cook it for me. And I said, great. And I was very excited. And she comes up and she says, anyone have a sharp knife? And so this is not too long after Rambo came out. And I said, I do. I come up with my survival knife. Let's get the compass on the back and matches inside and all stuff. And it was so heartbreaking. She's like, this knife is terrible. She goes to cut the fish, and my knife is incredibly dull. I don't even think I could cut myself, which I probably should thank my parents for that. But I thought that was hilarious. But she filleted my whole fish, and it ended up with two tiny little pieces of fish. And so that's actually kind of what I was looking for here, was I cut the fish a little bit smaller. I'm just going to put some flour on it, a little bit of salt, a little bit of pepper, which is all she did, salt, pepper, butter, and a cast iron skillet. Just toss it around real well. Very simple. This is actually the first dish I caught the same day that we caught this fish. I went home, I threw some actually in this same cast iron skillet that I think is kind of weird, but I traveled with it because I love it. cook, get a little bit of color on. We'll get Arthur up here. Our other 2 fish dishes are done. We'll make them look nice and pretty with this beautiful salsa. And we'll see if we made some looking good food tonight. Hey Arthur.
Hi Matt, how are you?
Fantastic. So,
What do we have here?
we have striped bass. So I went out fishing not too long ago, and I'd like to throw out a big shout out to my wife's cousin Dan, who brought me out with a bunch of kids from her family. We had a blast. It was awesome. We caught a ton of fish. So this is striped bass, and we caught right off Martha's Vineyard.
All right.
And so I made 3 different preparations today. This one here is actually wrapped in potato. So slice potato really thin, season the fish, wrap it, and it has a tarragon cream sauce on it. Right. So like the little ends here should be almost like eating a potato chip, and that should be almost like just a nice thin roasted potato.
All right.
This is from my very first cooking job when I lived on Nantucket. First time I ever had striped bass, this is how it was made. It was with pineapple and strawberry salsa. Cooked very, very simply. This is even more simple. This is a takeoff of something my grandmother made for me. The first time I ever caught a fish and ate it. So this is just dredged in a little flour, salt, pepper, just cooked in butter. Very, very simple. A little bit of lime on there, because we didn't have lemons, but.
Well, let's dig into it.
All right. Little crunch from where it got a little crunchy as it goes.
That's really good.
Very simple. And you can do that with almost any kind of fish. It's just a real quick, easy way to cook it. And this might be easier if I cut a little piece of it. I just want to cut it. So, or if you want, you can break a little potato chip off the end there, or whatever. And the cream sauce goes well with it. It's nice.
That is good too.
All right.
And you know, Matt, I gotta say, I'm not a real fish lover.
Yep.
But these are delicious.
All right. Well, that's one of the things when people ask what sort of fish should I have, I'm like, have some nice fresh striped bass. Because it's got a good texture, it's kind of meaty, but it's not fishy. You know, it's not one of these overpowering.
Let's try this.
All right, and then this, like I said, just has a little salt and pepper on it, and it's got this beautiful salsa on it, beautiful fresh salsa. How do you feel about that one?